So now that I've shown you the basic selection tools, I want to show you a little bit of what you can do with a selection. Anytime you select something, anything that you do next acts only on the selection. And that includes all the adjustments. It also can include other things. And I'm just going to go over these briefly. We're going to come back and get much more precise and much more sophisticated about this in future modules. But in this video, I just want to give you a sense of why selections are so incredibly useful. Okay, well, let's go ahead and start by making a copy of the background. I've brought all of this back to where we were before, and I want to show you a different way to do that by using a shortcut. And the shortcut for this is Command J or Control J on a PC. So I just hold the Command key, hit J, and it jumps a new layer. And we'll go ahead and turn off the background layer just so that it doesn't interfere with anything that we're doing. And I want to go ahead and go back and make a selection. Now, we experimented with this image quite a bit, and I think we decided that the best strategy for this was just to select the subject. That seemed to give us the quickest and most accurate selection. And this is pretty darn good. We're going to go with it, even though there's definitely some things that once we get more involved with selections that we can get better and better and better at. But we're just going to go with this to explore a little bit. Now, one thing I do want to do, I want to show you a little bit about cleanup. I think I mentioned that whenever you're making selections, it's never a one-step process. Generally, you start with a basic selection and then you refine it. So I want to just go back into the lasso tool. This is going to be very useful, and zoom in and show you some of the places where that selection, that automatic selection, didn't quite work. You see we've got extra selections here and between the toes, over here and down here. This is pretty minor, but I want to show you how to correct that. I've got the lasso tool and I've got it set to subtract from selection. Remember, I mentioned all of these options up here. And I'm going to show you another shortcut for this. So if I'm on Add to Selection and I want to go to Subtract, I can just hold down the Option or the Command key on a PC. And let me hold this over a dark place so you can see how that just puts the minus onto that little lasso. And that means as long as I hold that down, if I circle this, it subtracts it from the selection. This is a really important strategy that you'll be using a lot. And just remembering both that you can subtract from a selection and also that you can use this shortcut of the Option or the Command key is very, very helpful. Let's go ahead and zoom in. And zooming is also really important. And I'm just going to use the lasso tool by hand. And you do need some practice on this, but you can just actually draw with it just like you would a pencil. And I'm just drawing out those areas that I want to deselect. Oops, and if you miss, it's not a big deal. Just deselect a little more. And notice that I accidentally cut into there, so I'm going to let go. And I'm going to add that back in. Notice how when I do this with those areas, it's a little point sticking up. I don't have to be super precise on that side because I'm just taking it out, so I can just loop it around and grab it. Okay, this is a pretty good selection. Couple of areas we might be able to fix up, just add a little bit there. And again, I'm going to give you much more sophisticated tools to refine your selections beginning in the next unit, but for now we'll go with this. Now, I do want to actually do a little bit of feathering for what we're going to do so that the edge is not so abrupt. So I'm going to go up to Select, Modify, Feather, and I'm not going to do 50 pixels. You saw that was pretty extreme. I'm just going to do 5. Now, the number of pixels that you do on that feathering really depends not just on how much feathering you want, but how large or how small the file is. But this should work for us for now. Okay, so remember that we have the bird selected, so anything that we do from now on is only going to be applied to the bird. So I want to go back to Image and to Adjustments, and I want to just play with a couple of different tools so you can get used to all of the different adjustments that are available to you. We're not going to do all of these today, but we'll just play with a handful. This is curves, and you notice as soon as I check it, I get this little box, just like I did with brightness and contrast. Curves is a really cool tool because I can actually control the tonal range very precisely here. So I'm just going to pull this down in there and just pull the highlights up, and you see how that just increases the contrast. And I'm just going to make sure that the shadows don't get too glommed up. So you can just move that curve around. If you go too far, it gets kind of crazy, but then again, you might enjoy that. And remember that you have another week to keep playing with Photoshop and doing whatever you want. Just play with it. But we'll stick with those curves for now. So we're just going to go up and say, okay. And we see that we have this wonderful difference. Now, I'll go ahead and put this on for a second so you can see just what we've done to that bird. Really popped him out. Now, I want to go ahead and inverse this selection. So I'm just going to go up to Select, Inverse, so that I can actually do some work on the background. I'm going to just go into a different area of adjustments, which has to do with the color. So the first area has to do with exposure, the second area with color, and the other areas, we're going to get to those, but they're a little bit more specialty. I'm going to go into Hue and Saturation, and I'm going to up the saturation of the background. Notice how it's not touching the bird now, although it is touching that pole that he's sitting on. So we'll actually work with that in a second. And then I'm going to change the hue, and notice that we can actually change the color of this. All right. And just say, okay. I'm going to deselect this, check the edges, and you can see we've got a little bleeding coming over, but overall it's pretty fun. Okay, let's come in and work with that object selection tool and see if we can select out this pole and do something a little different with it. And it's working. Oh, very nice. So it selected the pole. It selected a little bit of the feet, but we're not going to worry about that for now. And I'm going to go ahead and go back in. Now it's not going to be precise because we've already changed it a little bit, but I'm going to go back to Hue and Saturation. I'm going to desaturate it. I'm going to make it a little bit darker. And I think I'll go ahead and change that color. Let's see. Ooh, that hue. We'll just bring it up to there. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to leave the saturation up a little bit. So now we've made several changes. We'll deselect. And let's take a look. This is what it looked like originally. And this is what it looks like with those selections. Now, I want to do one last thing, and that is to replace the background entirely. Now, I'm going to do this in a couple of steps. I'm going to go ahead and leave this with these adjustments, but I'm going to bring in a layer from a different image. So this is Arrange, Tile All Vertically, and that brings up this image that I was working with before. Now, there's lots of different ways to put two images together. In this case, I'm just going to grab this layer from this image. Don't grab the image, grab the layer and drag it over and drop it onto the other image. And then I'll just close this one out. Don't worry, it's copied it over so we don't have to keep that. And I'm going to just drop it down, and we'll go ahead and use the V or the Move tool just to move it down. Now it's a little bit different aspect ratio. For now, I'm just going to leave that be. Later on, I'm going to be able to show you how to make some of those changes. And we'll put this bird on top. And I want to do one last selection. On this one, I'm going to do the Object Selection tool, and I'm going to select both the bird and the fence pole. Now I might need to do a little bit of cleaning up, but I think it'll grab everything. Yep, that's very nice. Let me zoom in. And we're going to have to do just a little bit of cleanup. I'm going to grab the lasso tool so that I can include all of this. So I want all of the fence post and all of the bird. There we go. And I'm doing this pretty loosely. Now it can take, as you might already have realized, it can take, if you're doing a fairly complicated image, it can take quite a lot of time in order to do a very complex selection and adjustment. I'm going to go ahead and subtract just this stuff in here. And I want to go ahead and feather this just a little bit because because of the way we're doing this, it's going to be a little bit abrupt. I'm going to do two things just to give you one more little tool. I'm going to expand this. I'm only going to expand it by 5 pixels just to give a little bit more room. And I'm then also going to feather it by 5 pixels. And next I'm going to invert. So I've inverted my entire selection. Notice that I selected the bird, the object first, and then inverted because it was easier to select the subject than it was to try to select the background, as we learned before. Once I have that selected, I'm going to do Command X, and voila, the back image shows through. So I want to show you how to do one other thing. I'm going to add a solid color layer underneath. Now, in order to do this, I'm actually going to click on the lowest layer because the next layer will be added above that. I'm going to go to Layer, and I'm going to go to New Fill Layer, and I'll pick Solid Color. I'm going to pick OK, and notice it gives me this wonderful color picker box. And I'm going to go ahead and just pick, I think, a nice rich blue. Now it's underneath this layer, so you can't see it yet. But if I make that invisible, you see that we now have the blue as the background. So this is something that's really kind of wonderful about Photoshop. Notice that I can actually have a file that contains the bird, the background, the solid color, and then the original layer. And I can put those into different configurations. I can decide on the blue layer or the background layer. So that should give you some more tools and some more ideas to play with and experiment with this week. Next week, we'll add even more layers onto your toolkit.